I am so thrilled to have Barbara Marx Hubbard on the call today speaking about tipping points and the future of humanity. For those of you who do not know Barbara, she is a world-renowned author, visionary, social innovator, and educator. In 1984, her name was placed in nomination for the Vice Presidency of the United States, where she called for a planetary peace room to scan for, map, connect, and communicate what is working in America and the world. Barbara is the co-founder and chairperson of the Foundation for Conscious Evolution and the subject of Neil Donald Walsh's new book titled The Mother of Invention. Barbara, Buckminster Fuller once called you, quote, the best informed human now alive regarding futurism and the foresights it has produced. And I want to tell you what an honor it is to be talking with you today.
Thank you, Todd. Thanks for doing this.
No problem. So, Barbara, take us back to the time when you were a woman in your 30s, a housewife living the, quote, normal American life. What happened to you at this time? Specifically, what awoke within you and what realizations about the world and humanity came to you?
Well, I was married in 1951, and that was that whole generation of women that was more or less educated, no matter where you went to school, to get married and have many babies and take care of your husband. And I did that exact thing. I got married. I married an artist who was seeking the new story of humanity, so we got married on a personal quest. But as I started to have babies, I had 5 children. And with each child, I lost the deeper question or purpose of my vocation as I fell in love with the children. But around about the 4th child, this depression sunk in. And the depression was considered to be a neuroses at the time. But then I read Abraham Maslow, and he said every self-actualizing person has one thing in common: chosen work they find intrinsically self-rewarding, or let's say vocation. And I suddenly saw that the meaning of my depression was not that I was neurotic, but that I hadn't found my life purpose, much as I love my children and my husband. And that was the clue. And I started to shift in my early 30s from feeling defeated and lost to feeling like I was underdeveloped. And so I reached out to every author, every person I could find that attracted me from Lakeville, Connecticut, which wasn't very much, because I was in the wrong culture for me. At that time, there was no sense of what was emerging. There was no sense even of a crisis. And so gradually I found what attracted me, and one of them was Buckminster Fuller. And he said in his book, Utopia or Oblivion, now this is in the 60s, he said we have the resources, technology, and know-how to make this world work for everyone. And I thought, if that's true, what could I do about it? And then I read Teilhard de Chardin, the great paleontologist, Catholic philosopher, never published by the church in his lifetime. And he said he saw the divine or God or purpose in evolution, and he saw we're coming to a time, he called it the noosphere, the thinking layer of Earth. This is what we're on with the telephone, the teleseminar, the internet. The thinking layer of Earth would get its collective eyes, and we begin to connect heart with heart and center with center, basically a planetary awakening. And what I caught hold of, Todd, was that this depression inside me was something wanting to be expressed. And what wanted to be expressed, which is true for everybody, is something that you feel called to do, what you're born to do, what is your deeper life purpose. And I began to do what you have to do, is reach out to what really attracts you. And I found these evolutionary philosophers, actually. And then I went through a big jump, got a divorce, took 5 children to Washington, D.C., founded the Committee for the Future, gave 25 conferences, ran for vice president. So the shift in there was from depression, realization that it was a desire to express, search for what to express, which was life purpose. And for me, it was to become a communicator of evolutionary potential. And once I found that, I became what I call an evolutionary woman. And there was a shift of identity from the old form of woman to the evolutionary woman, or the feminine co-creator, which I think there are many, many, I don't know how many millions of us who feel the great creative urge within us. And we went through the period of massive self-reproduction, having babies, but we can't have so many babies. So the urge to create, urge to procreate is rising in millions of us as the urge to co-create. It's in women, it's in men.
So, Barbara, I hear two things. This is awesome. I hear two things. I hear that the Depression was realized through a lack of your living your life's purpose. Okay?
That's correct.
But I also hear, when you were mentioning Buckminster Fuller's kind of quote, that there's something emerging, or there's a crisis, okay, happening, and your life's purpose is somehow connected with this emergent evolutionary worldview and the global crisis that we're, amid. So for people that are listening, it's everyone's purpose to be a part of this kind of emergent worldview, or to help solve this crisis that we're in, or you see what I'm saying? There seems to be a distinction between the two.
Well, you see, when I first began to see what was emerging, what was creative, I wasn't fully aware of the crisis in the early 60s. I was just aware of this impulse in me and that there was a more positive future possible. But what's happened from the early 60s through the 70s, 80s, 90s, to 2000, 2011 is we have become aware of a global crisis that actually could destroy our biosphere, could destroy our life support system. This is a new factor on Earth. So the very drive to express life purpose that I had in the late 50s, early 60s has now become a necessity, because the fact is the system is not sustainable. It can't continue to grow the way it's growing, economically, militarily, financially. So millions of, I think, I was an early signal of something now very widespread. People are waking up to the fact that there's something more that they can do in response to the crisis. And here's the very positive part, that by responding to the crisis, just like you are, Todd, by doing this, you start to find more of your life purpose. Mm-hmm. And the way you can tell it's your life purpose is that by doing it, it's self-rewarding. By doing it, you are so, there's a compass of joy in there. So it means you have to shift sometimes from a existing function, whether it be like I was a housewife in Lakeville, Connecticut, or you have a certain job or a certain lifestyle. If now, because the crisis is so apparent, my metaphor is our crisis is a birth of a more evolving co-creative species.
Well, Barbara, I want to get to that, because I love when you talk about the crisis as a birth, and there's that whole ideology about the Chinese word for crisis is the same as the Chinese word for opportunity, and I want to get your opinion on that. But let's talk about the crisis a little bit, because so many of us are feeling that, all the things that you mentioned, the economic, the political, the amount of wars going on in the world, that there's so much of it that is just bubbling up, and it feels like it's connected in some way, but it's hard to really understand how it is all connected and how deep it runs and where it is going. How deep is this global crisis going to go? You mentioned it's potentially, the end of kind of civilization as we know it.
I think it really started to emerge in the mid-60s with Rachel Carson and Silent Spring. And when Robert Mueller, Assistant Secretary General of the UN, tried to have a conference on the environment and the biosphere, there was no word for it. We didn't know we had an environment or a biosphere to protect. And then it began to become apparent as systems started to break down, but the general public didn't get it. And if you just skip ahead, I think it really started with climate change and global warming and that work that Al Gore and other people did until it started to be front page news, our growth is not sustainable. It's a finite planet, and economic growth at this scale cannot be sustained, and we're beginning to get the feedback from nature. Now, here's the truth. There are no systems in existing power that know how to handle a global crisis like this.
Right.
The United Nations doesn't know it. Global corporations don't know it. But the interrelationship